Let's begin. I'm going to brief you about the key indicators in the Silicon Valley Index. And let's just start by talking about our employment picture. Well, this is our employment picture. You should know that there are 1.7 million people in the Silicon Valley workforce, and that is a 1% uptick over 2019. In other words, we went through the entire pandemic, lost many thousands of jobs during that period. We are now ahead of where we were prior to entering the pandemic. That's what you should understand about employment in the region. Here's our unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is about around 3.5%. So there's your picture. 1.7 in the workforce, unemployment at 3.5%. By the way, economists will tell you that unemployment figures in the threes, in the twos, certainly, that's actually considered to be the equivalent of full employment. So there's your update. Any questions? I think you have one major question, and that has to do with the fact that our economy has been volatile, and there's been a lot of ups, downs, and of course, layoffs. And we're going to talk about all of that in context right now. Okay, so this is showing you what the job picture looked like, and we're giving you the long view because we want you to understand that, there it is, the great epic recession that set in 2008, and then we lost around 100,000 jobs. But ever since that year, we were the first regional economy to recover from the epic recession, and we had been growth positive every year for a long run, a 10, 12-year run going into the pandemic. Then it was supposed that the pandemic would be ruinous. Actually, the opposite result obtained. Nobody saw that coming, least of all me. The pandemic turned out to be a bonanza for our tech companies especially. Very hard on other sectors, but the tech companies found themselves responding to a massive spike in demand for their services, the products that we needed to be sheltering in place, the platforms, the internet connectivity, the just-in-time delivery services, the devices that made it possible for us to be participating in a newly streaming economy. The search for the vaccine, mapping out the human genome, all of those things were precisely in Silicon Valley's wheelhouse. And so you see the job picture. We added jobs during the pandemic. We were actually growing in the pandemic, one of the only places in the country that was doing that. And in fact, that last year was 88,000 jobs, an uptick of 88,000 jobs. But last year, I want to point out that little teeny tiny speck. Get out your telescopes to take a look at that, and that's where we were as of right now. So in the last calendar year, in other words, precisely June to June, we added a couple of thousand jobs. So we used to be adding 60, 80,000 jobs. This past year, a couple thousand jobs. That's what happened to us. Now, is that problematic? We can venture opinions. That's actually for you to sort out, but there are different ways of thinking about it. I want you to understand this in terms of relative job growth. So here you see what we look like ever since the epic recession. And so this has been an economy that has grown more than 30% over that period of time, and you compare that to the United States, that the U.S. economy has only grown around 15, 16, 18% over that same period. So this is a strong, burgeoning, dynamic economy. And yet, all that you're reading in the papers are the headlines about job loss and the layoffs that are happening in the tech sector. So we need to understand that. It's a thing. It's a very real thing. In fact, this is the number. Since August of 2022, there have been 36,000 layoffs from Silicon Valley tech companies. That's a substantial number. What happened? Well, I think we can understand it. I think the narrative is by now well understood. The tech companies geared up to meet this massive spike in demand that the pandemic had presented. Then, as the pandemic was beginning to wane, there were some, perhaps many, who thought, well, actually, this is our new normal, and so we'll continue to hire and to staff at this rate. A few months go by, and it became clear that there was a new set of demand curves out there, that the world was presenting to us less demand, and so the tech industries have been going through a recalibration process, and they found that it's important for some divisions now to scale down. While that's been happening, other divisions have been scaling up. So tech is actually 37,000 jobs ahead of where it was going into the pandemic. Yes, this rash of 36,000 layoffs, but on net, our tech workforce has grown by 37,000. So we need to understand it in that context. We also need to understand this number in its broader context. So if you take that 36,000, all of those layoffs, if you were to understand that as a percentage of Silicon Valley's total workforce, here's the number, less than 2%. That's how we should understand those layoffs. If you were to understand them as a percentage of the entire tech workforce, well, that's about 7%. That's how we should understand it. When the dot-com came crashing down in 2000, we lost, in one fell swoop, 150,000 jobs. And then those losses continued in the succeeding years. So what we're experiencing right now is nothing of the sort, nothing. The best way we think you should think about it is that we're adjusting. We're recalibrating. That's what's happening in the tech sector. That makes sense. The tech sector also in an interesting in-between place, pivoting into the new and promising areas that are presenting themselves, like artificial intelligence, like massive computational processing, big data, machine learning. All of those things are happening in Silicon Valley right now. And so even while there's this downsizing, there's also the upsizing, and the things are happening simultaneously, and it's sort of evened out in 2023, and that's why you see that little speck on the job chart. Meanwhile, this is what's happening in Silicon Valley. This is our market cap. Market cap, let me remind you, is the value of all of the publicly traded stocks of Silicon Valley. And that market cap hit 14.9 trillion as of yesterday. That is a record-breaking number. We have never seen that number in Silicon Valley's history. So we leave it to you to tell the story. Is Silicon Valley in crisis? Well, yes, we're readjusting. Yes, there's transitioning. But if you look at results in terms of increasing headcount, stock market performance, competitive advantage, it seems pretty clear that Silicon Valley is still firing on most of its cylinders. Now, this is a very important question. This is also a hard chart to look at. But this chart is reminding us that Silicon Valley is more than our technology companies. That's probably an obvious point. But just for your information, tech makes up about 28% of our pie, tech. Now, there's tech in every segment of the economy. Everything has technology in it. But when we say tech, we're specifically talking about tech companies that are firing electrons and that are creating products with those electrons. And that's 28% of our pie. The biggest slice of our pie is what we call those jobs of place, community, infrastructure, and services. This is where you find all of those important professions that make the world go round. Construction, healthcare, education, retail, accommodation, travel, all of those. That's 50% of Silicon Valley's job pie. And what's important to understand is that those were the sectors most devastated by the pandemic. Well, guess what? They have now experienced 3 consecutive years of growth. I wasn't expecting that, so we double-checked, and it's true. There's growth in those sectors, and the size of the slice actually ticked upward by 3 percentage points. So there's recovery in Silicon Valley. That recovery is real. The recovery is not uniform. There are some sectors that are still impacted. They may never recover. because we have new patterns, new post-pandemic patterns that have changed the economy in significant ways, even structural ways. But there are many other segments that are actually recovering. We were very surprised to see that construction, healthcare, and education added 11,000 jobs last year, and that's a 5% growth rate, 3 consecutive years of growth. Well, another really big question that's been on everybody's mind as we think about the economy is the massive amount of departures that took place during those deep days of the pandemic. Do you want to know what the actual number was when we finally sorted it all out? 67,000. 67,000 people departed our region. So let's understand this now in context and see if we can get a handle on what that means. Silicon Valley departures. Okay, well, there are actually several components that we have to understand when we think about population change. And the first one is this. There it is. This is how our population has been growing. Let me just make sure you have this perspective. We've been adding to our population for a long run. In fact, since as long as we've been measuring, we've been growing. That actually stopped. We plateaued in the year approximately 2017, 2018. We hit a plateau, and then we began to shrink. What's going on here? Is that because of the exodus? No, actually not. There are many contributing factors. The first is our birth rate. And demographers will tell you that this is a startling finding. The birth rate has fallen in Silicon Valley significantly. We're not having as many kids. That's one thing. The death rate has also increased. Silicon Valley has an aging population. Then during the pandemic, COVID became our third leading cause of death. So when you're counting up population, you always count up the total number of deaths, the total number of births. What is the net? Historically, that had always been around 25,000 people. Today, in 2024, that net is 10,000 people. So that's significant. We're no longer growing in the way that we once did, only because of births and deaths. Now, you add to that immigration. And immigration has always been such an important part of the Silicon Valley story. And so here you can see, following the epic recession, there was this constant stream of people coming from foreign countries to pursue their path in Silicon Valley. That became negative. The growth in immigration was negative starting in 2016. It corresponds with the political climate of that time and the posture, the tone that was set by our national government. And so, sure enough, this is what we can observe in Silicon Valley over these past several years. And then, get out your telescope again, finally an uptick. We now have an uptick, and immigrants are coming back to Silicon Valley. Let me just make an important point. I think you understand this. We did not build Silicon Valley. We didn't do it. Other people did. They came from all over the world, and they decided to pursue their innovative dreams and their entrepreneurial dreams in this valley. That's how it happened. And so that has always been the Silicon Valley story. It has been interrupted for the past 6 years. It seems to have righted itself. We count these incoming migrants in the thousands, in the many thousands. So there's your net. That's what we look like. And for the first time and when you factor in those 67,000 departures over that 3-year period, we are finally, once again, growth positive. Silicon Valley has now a growing population just by a couple ticks, a couple of percentage points, but we're now growing. Here, just to make it abundantly clear, last year we had a 52% drop in people leaving the area, and we had a 37% increase in foreign immigration. So there's your population picture. Now, back to one more point about our departing members, people who left the region during the pandemic. We determined that actually about a quarter of them are still in the Bay Area. They moved to the perimeter of the Bay Area where housing was more affordable, and remember, we have the option now to work from home. And that made a significant difference to where people located. So half still in the Bay Area. The next quarter, still in Northern California. I call it Greater Silicon Valley. They're up in Sacramento, our suburb, right? So that's half of the departures. And then the other half of the departures have gone to the places that you're hearing about in the media. Yes, they're going to Austin. Yes, they're going to Seattle. Some are going to Miami. So that's how we should understand the out-migration. I think a corresponding question, and an equally important question, is not if we're losing people. It's, are we losing companies? That would be a significant trend if there was this significant outflow of companies relocating. And the answer to that question is no. We've lost, since the pandemic set in, a grand total of 4 companies. That's all. You know who they are. It's these companies. I would suggest that they all have particularities, and their backstory it pretty much is explained by the CEO himself. And you know, there are things going on there. But what is significant, understand, every single one of these companies left their workforce behind. They moved their headquarters, but they have actually expanded their footprint in Silicon Valley. This is a fact. They've added significantly research facilities, even manufacturing facilities still happening, with the exception of Palantir. The other 3 still in Silicon Valley in a significant way. So that's what we should understand. This is a chart that we track because we think it says something about Silicon Valley's place in a national ecosystem of technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It's a hard chart to read, but I'll just tell you what this means. The size of the circle means your total number of tech jobs. The placement of the circle on that horizontal axis is your percentage growth rate. How fast are those tech jobs growing? And then your placement vertically on this map is the percentage of the total workforce that is accounted for by technology jobs. So if you think that technology is really important to an economy, and we think it is, then you want to be in the upper right of this chart. That's where you'd like to be, and guess what? That's where we are, the purple dot. And look at that, bigger than any other region we can compare it to, higher, further. There's faster growth rates right now in Austin and Salt Lake City, good for them. And we're networked to that. They're networked to this. The Silicon Valley phenomenon is becoming distributed. Nevertheless, we continue to have more intensity than any of our peer regions. That's the case. Now, there's a really important question that we should ask. And that's, how's the innovation engine doing? Are we still firing? Despite all of the things that we've been describing, are we still firing? I'm going to go through this really fast. But there's your venture capital picture. And it's got that funny spike in it. See it? If you take that spike out of the model, our venture capital is just behaving perfectly nice. It's just perfectly nice. That spike was crazy. It was the year 2021, during the height of the pandemic. There was a lot of FOMO going on. We're going to discuss this with our distinguished expert in a few minutes. But this past year, we came down to 30 billion. Billion with a B. That's your venture capital picture. I just want you to know that that's a big number. Okay? That's a very big number. It's a very big number in context. That continues to be a lot. And importantly, we have still the largest shares of all the venture capital in America, all the venture capital in California. So that's your venture capital picture. We'll skip over some of this. You should know that a lot of the venture capital is being spent in what we call mega deals. Those are deals that are more than $100 million. So venture capitalists right now are really excited about big, growing companies that haven't gone public yet, and they're routing a lot of the funds into it. They're not spreading it around in smaller amounts to smaller companies the way you would spread, you know, fertilizer on your lawn. That's not happening. We have this concentration of mega deals. Now, if you are particularly concerned about artificial intelligence, if you think, like I do, that that's our next big wave of innovation and entrepreneurship, then the question is, what's going on there? Well, let me show you a number. It's up by 220%. Venture capitalists see something there. We'll be talking in a minute about that. But that segment is growing. But it's also growing not only by venture capital, but also by the research going in, the institutional investing, the citations of Silicon Valley scholars and companies. We think this is a pretty robust result. I'll remind you that we continue to have the highest concentration of Unicorns, that's a privately held company, has not yet gone public, valued at more than $1 billion. We have the world's largest share of those in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. Then, this is a key question, is there still startup activity? Despite all the stuff that we've described, the layoffs, the pandemic, a falling amount of venture capital. Well, there's your startup picture. We've been adding startups continuously as long as we've been measuring it, to the tune where today we think there are about 3,000 startups out there, and those are just the ones we count, you realize, because they're incorporated. We're not counting guys and gals that are still using their uncle's money and their own credit card. We haven't been able to count those. But this is what it looks like when you look at companies that have got that first round, second round seed stage funding. Patents is a very important measure of the ingenuity of an economy, and our numbers are up there. There's no concern that we can see here. And you should know that San Jose continues to be the #1 patent-generating city in the entire United States. You're sitting right in the middle of it. Yes, that's an applause line, for sure. But these are the top 20 patent-generating cities in the United States, and the lion's share of them are Silicon Valley cities. You can see them shaded there. This is amazing. This is the productivity per worker. So this is actually a measure of GDP, or gross regional product, and then you divide that number by the total number of people in the workforce, and that's your productivity. And we continue to grow in productivity, some trailing off, but we lead the nation, we lead the state. So those are important things to understand. The initial public offerings. Some people think this is an important measure of regional health and the dynamism of the startup economy. We have tons of information. I've decided not to go over it. You can find it in the index. Here's the key thing for you to know. 4 IPOs out of Silicon Valley in the last year. So those are tapering. That's not happening. We don't know if that's a trend. We just have to wait and see. But I will tell you, these are the 4 companies, and they're in solar, they're in healthcare, they're in biomedical, and those 4 companies have generated more than $1 billion in proceeds, more than the rest of the IPOs in the country, and more profitable than the IPOs that we saw last year. So that's something. Let's talk about commercial space just really quickly. Commercial space, it's an indicator. It's a telling indicator. It tells you what's going on in the economy. And that's what it looks like. We sublet our office. Joint venture is now a remote organization. This is happening throughout the entire economy. And so we are talking about commercial real estate as one of those industries that may be permanently affected by our new patterns since the pandemic. We're working remotely, and just so you know, that's not a passing fad. That seems to be here to stay. People love working in their pajamas. That's what we've learned. Before the pandemic, only 5% of our population would do that. In the pandemic, we went up to 35. It came down to 25 last year, but do you know why? Because companies are insisting. They're saying, we want you back in the office, and they're getting heavy about it, so that's happening. But it's also important to understand that as your income goes up, the percentage of that income group that are working from home goes up dramatically. 60% of people making more than $150,000 a year are working remotely. There's also forms of inequity associated with this, and we'll be tagging that as we go along. Not all of the races and ethnicities are working from home at the same rates, and there's ways to wrap your head around that. So this is what we need to know. But here's how the Bay Area compares to other metros. Last year, year before last, the companies started saying, hey, we want you back. Come back to the office. We insist. Right now, come back. Well, look, in Austin, Texas, they complied. 60% went back to the office, and so forth. Dallas, Los Angeles, they all complied. In Silicon Valley, people said, nah, I'm not going back. And this interesting power dynamic set in. So that's what we look like. San Francisco, 35%. Only 35% went back. The rest still working from home. San Jose, similar. And it's had this massive effect on our downtowns. Look at this. This is we track it by cell phone activity. That's right. We track you. We know what you're doing, and you're not going downtown. That's what we know. And it's particularly intense in San Francisco. Look at San Francisco. This was published in the paper yesterday. Look at all of these closures. Every dot is the closure of a major establishment in San Francisco's downtown. My heart breaks for that great city. It is a great and noble city, an American treasure, we all know that, but undergoing very difficult transitions as a result of these phenomena. And so there you have it. Commercial vacancy is now approaching 20%. That's a very high number. It's not as high as the .com when we got up into the 30s, but we are blowing up into 20% vacancy out there. We're also not building, and this is showing you that the construction of new office space, lab, industrial, that's also trailing off. Interesting, rents are still holding. I would have thought there would be a corresponding decline in the rental rates, but we're holding, and the rest of the country seems to be doing the same. This is interesting. Hotel construction, ground to a halt. Hotel occupancy, also not up. And so there's major things going on. First of all, less investment. Second of all, conversions. And this university is one of the most innovative. They have grabbed, if you don't know, the Signia Hilton. Nice work, Cynthia. Well done. Yeah. The Signia Hilton, formerly the Fairmont, is now a Spartan dormitory. And how about that? So that's really interesting. Okay, we have technology that we're encouraging to use. You just scan the QR code and you can pull up Speedo. Slido, it's called Slido. Speedo is something you swim in. You pull up Slido and fiddle with your device, and you can take part in these polls. And the question is, how do you feel about this transition that we're going through? Do you feel like it's ominous or not? I just want to take your temperature. We're asking about your mood. By the way, you can also be posing questions. We'd love for you to pose questions in Slido, and you can upvote them. And we'll see what questions start bubbling up to the top, and we'd love to talk about them. But I would now like to invite to the stage a subject matter expert to join me. Niraj mentioned that we're experimenting with formats. We'll be interested in your feedback on this. But instead of having panel discussions after the briefing, we decided just to bring the experts up onto the stage during the briefing and make them a part of the briefing. So having described all of this stuff that's happening with the innovation engine, I thought that we should hear from a venture capitalist, a real true blue bona fide venture capitalist, also a founder, a person who's involved in founding companies. So we decided to get one of the best, and that is our friend Tom Lounibos. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Yeah, if you just turn that on, you will be hot right there. You should be hot.
Are we hot? Yeah,
yes, we're live. Okay.
I guess I'm part of the aging economy of the Silicon Valley.
Well, and that makes two of us, definitely. Tom is the president of Accenture Ventures, and he's also a guy that's founded companies. I'm just curious, what is the talk among your kind? What are they saying? What are people saying about Silicon Valley right now? Is this on the spectrum of exuberant to solemn? Where are people right now?
It really depends on who you talk to, because we're not one, as a community, we're not one type. There are founders, there are CEOs, but there are salespeople, there are product managers, there are all kinds of folks within this community. If you talk to venture capitalists, you'll even have a mixed review, but there's a fair amount of positivity if you are investing in early stage companies. There is a little concern and triage going on for companies that are in what's called growth stage or late stage, because those are the ones that need more capital. But the capital is there, and the demand for innovation has never been higher for me in 46 years in this valley than it is today. If you talk to the CEOs of those growth stage companies, where capital has been pulled back to some extent over the last, as all your numbers, and by the way, great data, and validated in many, many ways in almost every conversation I have on a daily basis. But when you're talking to the founders like I have been for 42 years, 46 years, the early stage founders, it's probably never been a better time to start a company. And for my 6 companies, and I was very fortunate to have a couple IPOs and other elements, I always started them in down markets because the velocity of the market itself enabled me to get, it's almost like a car getting on a fast freeway. If everybody's going 100 miles an hour, it's scarier than anything.
Interesting perspective.
And so you have to run, you got to go fast, fast, fast. When the economy is a little slower, it's easier to get on and build your company the right way. So for early stage companies, right now capital's there. The barrier of entry for innovation is lower than it's ever been, at least in my perspective. And the demand is there, and so it's very good. For teams that are at growth stage that need a lot of capital, IPOs are not there, exits aren't there, they're getting squeezed, and it's really tough. And I talk to founders on a daily basis, and I'm candidly concerned for their well-being and the well-being of their employees, because the stress associated to it is pretty significant. And that's an element of the Silicon Valley that we all have to work on, is the well-being of the community as much as anything. So it really depends on who you talk to. And it's a wide range, but there's a fair amount of optimism because the capital is coming back into the market.
That big spike, $95 billion of venture capital 2 years ago.
2021.
Was that just an anomaly? Was that FOMO?
Well, it was the perfect storm. I think to some degree, yes, it's an anomaly because you had interest rates at 0. You had the impacts of COVID that varied. I mean, the mobile workforce is one part of it, but every corporation around the world was looking to transform themselves. Some of it was because the resiliencies of the supply chain were impacted and they realized that they were vulnerable. Some of it was new competitive pressures that were happening. So the barriers of entry and the demand for change was significant, but money is the key to the game. And money was really available because there was no other place to put it. And so you saw a huge amount of money coming into the Silicon Valley and the Silicon Valleys around the world. And that's the area that I think we should be really proud of what we've done. You know, when I first started in 1977 in the Valley, there were semiconductor firms, but the entire computing industry or tech community was defined by 8 companies. And they were laughingly called IBM and the Seven Dwarfs.
Oh, gosh.
There were no software companies at all. And so when you talk about thousands of companies, that all started here. And now Silicon Valleys around the world are starting to evolve as well.
Let me ask you one last question.
Yes.
Artificial intelligence. Hype? Is there hype and exuberance here, or is this for real?
Of course there's hype, but it's real. It's very real. Everything gets hyped. There's been, in my career, over that 46-year, I've seen the emergence from mainframes to PCs. So the PCs was my first wave. The second wave was the internet, and of course the bubble bursted there. Cloud computing became the next big wave. Generative AI and AI is not just a Mavericks wave. It's a 100-foot wave.
Oh my.
The transformation potential, the productivity gains, and I think it's scary to a lot of folks, and it should be for all of us. We need to have responsible AI. We have to be curators of that, all of us here in the Valley, as we go forward. But the productivity gains, and the areas that I really particularly love and what Accenture is really focused on is life sciences, in silico bio. And COVID taught us this more than anything. How do we get drug discovery happening quicker? Well, generative AI is going to do that. We're doing a lot of investments right now in that particular area where it takes about $5 billion in 15 years to produce a new molecule, which is the foundational element of building in silico bio. Generative AI may make that a 1 year, a 6-month process for a fraction of the cost. And so the impacts for good are there, but there's also the impacts the other way too, and we have to be really responsible. But it is a major wave. It's going to impact every part of our society. Accenture Research has done a really great job, Paul Doherty particularly, the CTO of the company. About 40% of the hours of enterprise workers, corporate workers, are going to be impacted positively by generative AI. And that's
interesting.
pretty significant.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Lounibos.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for bringing your insight. Thank you. We're going to continue by talking about people in Silicon Valley. We've been talking about people with regard to their employment. Let's just also talk about people, including a really important thing, which is, are we housing the people in Silicon Valley? This is a chart I won't detail just because I want to keep us on time, but do understand that Silicon Valley's workforce is the most highly educated workforce in the world. That continues to be the case. This gives you more detail on that. This shows you that we're continuing to issue more science and engineering degrees with each successive year, and that this is an encouraging indicator that women are receiving those degrees in higher percentages than they have previously, so we can be encouraged by that. I thought you might be interested to know, I was saying about how our workforce is an international workforce. Well, this is what it looks like. This is our tech workforce. 26% come from India. About 40% are coming from China or other parts of Asia, and then we've broken it down by all of the segments of Asia. So we're the world's melting pot, and we're proud of that. I thought you might be interested in females' presence in the tech workforce. Well, they make up 26% of that pie. That's growing, but of course, we're interested to see far more representation than that. And then you might be interested, if you took all of the women in Silicon Valley's workforce, 22% of them are working in tech, and the rest are working outside of tech. Okay, so that's an interesting factoid. But now let me get to a really important thing, housing. This is a briefing on the economy, but it's also a briefing about people. And both of these things are economic issues. Our housing is a big segment of the economy, and it's a driver. And then it's also a social issue. Are we able to house all of the people that are coming here from around the world and so forth? So let me talk about that. Let me start by telling you what you already know. We have the world's highest housing prices. There are some places like Hong Kong where you can find per square foot more expensive real estate. But for the most part, without those asterisks, it's just a fact. We have the world's highest housing prices. The median sale price last year, 2023, reached $1.8 million. That's the median. Remember, half or more than that, half or less than that. So that's what we're talking about. In Silicon Valley, if you want that middle range house, it's $1.8 million. By the way, if you took all of the housing stock, apartments, condos, homes, if you took all of it, and in Silicon Valley, the median home value would also be 1.8, it turns out, 1.8. Now, guess what? In the entire nation, there are only 9 counties that have a median home value of $1 million or more. And 5 of them are Silicon Valley counties. So that's how we should understand our housing stock. So then the question is, are we doing anything about it? Well, here's some bureaucraties for you. The state is, of course, on our case. They think we need to be building more housing and more affordable housing. And so our state government hands down quotas. They tell every city, you need to create this many units of housing. Those quotas, by the way, are given to ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments in our region, and then ABAG goes through this exercise and they give a quota to every Silicon Valley city. Then, these cities shrug. They collectively shrug. We have city people in the room. Some of you are laughing at me. Some of you may take offense at that, but nevertheless, this is the actual outcome, which is to say that against those quotas, this is how we're performing. When it comes to housing that is affordable to our very low-income earners, we are only at about 32% of RENA. That's the acronym for the quotas. For low income, we're only at 43%. For moderate income, we are at 62% of meeting those quotas. But what we are doing is building luxury housing. We're doing that plenty, and that's because that's easier for the developers. It pencils out. They see that profit margin, and then of course our population is self-selecting, especially with our driving industries, highly compensated tech workforce. So that's your RENA picture. This is showing you the same thing. So last year we had about 4,400 new units approved. 4,400, that's your number. Hang your hat on that number. We have massive amount of housing need, but we only approved 4,400 units. And then of those units, that's the percentage over the years that have been the units approved. That's how many of them are affordable. So in 2023, 27% of approved units were affordable to our workforce. Rental rates came down in San Francisco, rising in Silicon Valley. This is something that we call burden. It's a technical term. If, according to the government, federal government, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, you're considered burdened. Not recommended that you spend 30%. If you're spending more than 50% on housing, that's considered to be severely burdened. Well, that's what we look like. We are severely burdened in Silicon Valley. Renters, especially homeowners, less so. Nevertheless, we're experiencing burden in Silicon Valley. This is the percentage of home buyers, first-time home buyers, that can get financing from the bank to purchase that median-priced home. That number is going down every year. So this year, it's 26%. So only a quarter of first-time home buyers can qualify to purchase that median-priced home. This is what it looks like by race and ethnicity. So these are the things that we don't enjoy reporting. But the affordability figures are even less if you are Black or African American, or if you are Hispanic or Latino. So persistent disparities that way by race. And then, no surprise, not an unrelated development, our homeless population is growing. And let me just say a brief word about that. This is such a difficult, heartbreaking issue. And I just want to be clear, this number would be far higher, exponentially higher, were it not for the heroic efforts of our levels of government at the local, state, and federal levels, but also the heroic efforts of the faith communities, the nonprofit organizations, the humanitarian organizations. Nevertheless, despite all of those efforts and massive infusions of investment, we still have 10,000 unhoused individuals in Silicon Valley, and in the Greater Bay Area, that number is even larger. We thought you might be interested to know what people see as the primary cause of their homelessness. And so these are people that are responding to interviewers. And there's a lot of thinking, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion. Not all of it is always fully informed. But here's what people actually say. 25% of respondents are homeless because they lost their job. And so they couldn't hold on to the house. And then it's about 10% because they're struggling with forms of addiction. And then the other percentages is because they're in flight from domestic violence or some kind of upheaval in a relationship. So that's what these things look like. Now, these are the number of units that we've been able to fund through public programs. And Project HomeKey was a key program, and so you can see that we went through 2 rounds of investment in interim and permanent housing. But this region has not participated in the 3rd round, just so you know. There are complicated reasons for that, but programs don't go on in perpetuity, and our homeless programs aren't necessarily, and that's an evidence of that. So here's another poll for you as we talk about housing. And I want to now invite our next subject matter expert to join us. I want you to meet Regina Celestin Williams, and she is the Executive Director of SV at Home. Thanks for being here, Regina. My pleasure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about housing, and there's a big question, and the audience is already sorting themselves out on this question. But I would just like to say that there's an interesting dynamic, and it's the first time I've seen it as long as I've been here. The dynamic is that the state, members of the state legislature, the governor himself, have grown pretty impatient with local governments who are not approving housing at a significant rate. They would do anything to address the dent, to make a dent in the problem. And so there is a spate of legislation in the State House that would actually change the power balance. That would take control out of the hands of local communities and mandate housing approvals and then their implementation. My question, how do you feel about that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Russ.
Yes, thank you.
I really appreciate the data that you're sharing, but also the lens with which you're sharing it. In terms of the state legislature's recent sort of streamlining bills and mandates around building more housing, particularly affordable housing, it really isn't a shift from local control to state control. What the state is trying to do is their job. We have multiple levels of government for a reason. The state is trying to empower the local governments to uphold the priorities that they've already put in place. The zoning, the priorities for their projected growth, their plans. They're trying to make sure that we're not slowing down the progress project by project. The work is really about embracing the work that local jurisdictions has done and making sure that there's not, one or two loud voices influencing folks to slow down and hesitating and moving forward the plans that they've set for their communities. And so what we've seen with these streamlining bills is that those local jurisdictions that really do want to meet the needs of their communities, because when we look at this data, we're not just talking about numbers or bar graphs or lines on a screen. We're talking about people, families, people who live in their communities when they're trying to meet these needs of the folks who are their community, the greater folks who are getting displaced, who are very vulnerable to being overburdened. They're working very hard to put plans in place and to move developments forward. And so now the state is saying, yes, you can use the streamlining to continue to push this forward. And one of the things that a lot of the streamlining has prevented from being an impediment to development moving forward is state CEQA. I mean, so the state is trying to get out of its own way.
California Environmental Quality Act. That's
right.
Yep.
So we believe it's working. Yep. We believe that it's effective, and there are ways that we're tweaking things. And I think one of your data points showing the increase in affordable housing approvals is showing that as well as demonstrating that it's working, and that the communities that are struggling with embracing this new state mandates, yes, California is diverse, Silicon Valley in and of itself is diverse, so there's communities who struggle with providing access to folks to live in their communities, and this is going to put more pressure on them to continue to meet the needs of everyone who lives here.
So about that, inclusionary zoning, where do you fall on that?
I believe that the challenge is multifaceted. We are grossly behind in the number of housing units that need to be built. And the folks who are most vulnerable are folks who are getting pushed out of housing altogether and living unhoused. But we can't just solve the housing crisis by building market rate alone. So we believe that, yes, inclusionary zoning ordinances are powerful tools because we need multiple tools. We need a whole range of tools in our toolbox, and this is one of them that has been found to be effective not just here in Silicon Valley, but across the country. And so we do ask that jurisdictions look to this tool. You know, with the complexities of the housing crisis, it really is important that we're exploring all kinds of ways to make sure that everyone can live here, and we're all impacted by that. We want folks who work in the schools, in our companies, everyone to be able to live here, and so we need a range of tools, and inclusionary zoning is just one of those tools that we found to be effective.
Regina, developers will say that they're getting hammered, not by the cost of construction itself, but by delays, the increasing cost of the approvals themselves. Is streamlining addressing that at all? Is there anything to be done about that?
Yes, and one of the things that actually is effective in analyzing the restraints that increase costs of development is the housing element. You know, the housing element is a process of creating an environment where development can happen. The cities themselves don't build the housing. They create these plans, this environment, they review their ordinances and their policies to allow for more development to happen. And so you had the RENA numbers up here earlier. It is very important that we create an environment where development can happen. But also, I really appreciate what the former speaker, Tom, said about money is the key.
Yep.
So we can permit projects all we want in terms of really meeting the affordable housing need. There is a bottleneck in terms of funding resources. And the exciting thing, the hopeful thing, is that a place like Silicon Valley, if anyone has the resources, we do. Yep. And if we look at building more housing, more affordable housing, not as charity, not as, oh, you're lucky if you get it, but that's something we need to do to support all of the work of the folks in this room, then we'll get it done.
Here, here, right here. Yep. She's Regina Williams, Regina Celestin Williams, SV at home. Thank you for bringing your expertise, your insight to State of the Valley.